You accused me of betrayal, but you've been living a lie since 2004.
These documents prove every signature was
22 years of marriage were obliterated by a single manila envelope tossed onto my kitchen island. He looked me dead in the eye and denied our daughter to steal a fortune, completely unaware that his own sinister secret from 2004 was about to drag him straight to hell. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Connecticut estate, distorting the manicured lawns into muddy blurs. Dinner was simmering on the stove, a rosemary lamb roast, Nathaniel's absolute favorite, prepared meticulously to celebrate his recent promotion to senior partner at his architectural firm. The house was warm, filled with the scent of garlic and the soft jazz playing from the overhead speakers. It felt like the perfect evening, a testament to the life we had built together over 2 decades. Footsteps echoed in the foyer, heavy and deliberate. Nathaniel didn't call out his usual greeting. He didn't shrug off his bespoke tailored coat or head to the wet bar to pour his evening scotch. Instead, he walked straight into the kitchen, his jaw set, his eyes cold and unreadable. He looked like a stranger wearing my husband's face. Before a single word of greeting could leave my lips, he tossed a thick manila envelope onto the marble island. It landed with a heavy, dismissive slap that silenced the jazz in my mind. "She's not mine, Rebecca," he said. His voice was completely devoid of emotion, hollowed out and flat. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. The words hung in the air, absurd and entirely incomprehensible. I looked from the envelope to his face, searching for the punchline of a deeply unfunny joke. "What are you talking about, Nate?" My voice trembled slightly, betraying the sudden icy dread pooling in my stomach. "Who isn't yours?" "Harper." He pointed a manicured finger at the envelope. I had my suspicions for a long time. The way she looks, her temperament, the fact that she has absolutely nothing in common with my side of the family. I finally stopped lying to myself and did what I should have done years ago. I ran a DNA test. The room spun. My hands gripped the edge of the cold marble counter to steady myself. Harper, our beautiful, bright 21-year-old daughter, the child we had prayed for, cried for, and finally welcomed in the spring of 2004 after years of agonizing fertility treatments. A DNA test? I gasped, the sheer absurdity of the accusation sparking a sudden flame of anger. "Nathaniel, have you lost your mind? She is your daughter. You were in the delivery room. You cut the cord. We went through 3 rounds of IVF at Street Market. Jude's together to have her. Read the paper, Rebecca," he snapped, his facade of calm cracking to reveal a simmering, vindictive fury. 0% probability of paternity. 0. You played me for a fool for 22 years. Who was it? The tennis instructor at the club? That colleague from your old publishing job? Who fathered the child I've been paying for, raising, and loving as my own? Fumbling, I tore open the envelope. The stark black and white lettering of a certified laboratory report glared back at me. There it was, in undeniable print. Probability of paternity, 0%. My brain short-circuited. It was biologically, fundamentally impossible. I had never been with another man since the day Nathaniel and I took our vows. Not once. Not a drunken mistake. Not a fleeting moment of weakness. I knew the truth of my own life. "This is a mistake," I whispered, my eyes desperately scanning the barcodes and the medical jargon, looking for the flaw. "This test is wrong. Samples get mixed up, Nate. Or, it's a fake. I swear to you on my life, on Harper's life, I have never been unfaithful to you." "Save the performance," he sneered, buttoning his suit jacket with an air of absolute finality. "I've already spoken to Oliver Harrington. The divorce papers will be served to you by the end of the week. Under the infidelity clause of our prenuptial agreement, you walk away with nothing. No alimony, no claim to the estate, and certainly no piece of my firm. You and your bastard daughter can pack your bags." The cruelty of his words struck me like a physical blow. The infidelity clause. Suddenly, the fog of confusion began to lift, replaced by a terrifying clarity. Nathaniel's firm was about to go public. He was on the verge of a massive financial windfall, worth tens of millions. If we divorced normally, I was entitled to half. If I cheated, I was entitled to pennies. "You're setting me up," I breathed, staring at the man I had slept next to for 20 years. "You faked this test to steal my half of everything." Before he could answer, the front door clicked open. "Mom?" Dad, I'm home. Harper's cheerful voice rang out from the hallway. She bounded into the kitchen, her college backpack slung over one shoulder, her cheeks flushed from the cold rain. She stopped dead in her tracks, her smile faltering as she took in the scene, her father standing like a stone statue, and her mother clutching a piece of paper, sobbing uncontrollably. "What's wrong?" Harper asked, her voice dropping to a frightened whisper. Nathaniel didn't even look at her. The man who had taught her how to ride a bike, who had cried at her high school graduation, refused to meet her eyes. "Ask your mother," he said coldly. He turned on his heel and walked out of the kitchen. A minute later, the heavy oak front door slammed shut, echoing like a gunshot through the house. The roar of his sports car engine revved in the driveway, and then he was gone, disappearing into the storm. Harper rushed to my side, her arms wrapping around my shaking shoulders. "Mom, what happened? What is that paper?" Looking into her eyes, eyes that I had always thought mirrored Nathaniel's mother's, my heart shattered into a million jagged pieces. How could I tell my innocent daughter that the man she idolized had just erased her from his life? I crumpled the fraudulent DNA report in my fist, a fierce, primal protective instinct overriding my grief. I didn't know how Nathaniel had forged the document, but I was going to tear his life apart to prove it. Morning arrived with the harsh, unforgiving glare of a gray autumn sky. The house felt like a tomb. I hadn't slept a single second. I spent the night holding Harper as she cried herself into an exhausted slumber on the living room sofa, broken by the incomprehensible reality that her father had simply packed a single bag and vanished. By 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. A process server stood on the porch, handing me a thick stack of legal documents. Nathaniel wasted no time. The petition for dissolution of marriage cited irreconcilable differences exacerbated by newly discovered adultery. He was ruthlessly executing his plan, banking on my shock and humiliation to force a quick, quiet settlement. He severely underestimated me. My first call was to my own attorney, a bulldog of a litigator, who advised me to stay in the house and secure every financial document I could find. My second call was to a private, highly reputable genetics lab in Boston. "We are going to take our own test," I told Harper, sitting her down at the kitchen table. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale. "Your father is trying to use a forged document to trigger a penalty in our prenuptial agreement. He wants all the money, sweetie. But we are going to prove him wrong with absolute, undeniable science." Harper nodded slowly, her trust in me the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. We drove in silence to the clinic. The process was sterile and clinical, a simple cheek swab for both of us, sealed in tamper-proof vials, fast-tracked for overnight results. The next 48 hours were a living nightmare. Nathaniel blocked my number. He transferred all our joint liquid assets into a private holding account, a move my lawyer was frantically filing injunctions to reverse. He was trying to starve me out, to force me into panic. But I didn't panic. I waited for the truth. When the call from the genetics lab finally came, I put the doctor on speakerphone in the study, squeezing Harper's hand so hard my knuckles turned white. "Mrs. Harrington," Dr. Harrison's voice was gentle but professional. "We have run the panels twice to ensure absolute accuracy, given the legal implications you mentioned." "Tell me," I demanded, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Tell me he is the father so I can take this to court and destroy him." There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Mrs. Harrington, the results confirm that you are undeniably the biological mother of Harper. However, the comparison against the DNA profile you provided from your husband's hairbrush shows a 0% match. Nathaniel is not the biological father of this child." The world tilted on its axis. The floor felt like it was dissolving beneath my feet. Harper let out a small, wounded gasp and pulled her hand away from mine, backing away as if I were a stranger. "No," I stammered, the phone slipping slightly in my sweaty grip. "No, Dr. Harrison, that is medically impossible. I never slept with anyone else. We did IVF. We used his sperm and my eggs. There has to be a mistake." "I understand this is shocking," the doctor replied softly, "but the DNA does not lie. If you underwent IVF, there is a possibility of a laboratory mix-up at the clinic regarding the paternal sample. I strongly suggest you investigate the medical records from your fertility treatments." The line went dead. Harper was staring at me, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, If Dad isn't my dad, who is? I couldn't answer her. My mind was reeling, spiraling back to the winter of 2004, St. Jude's Memorial Hospital. The endless injections, the harvesting procedures, the agonizing wait. Nathaniel had been so supportive back then, taking time off work, holding my hand, bringing me ginger tea. Or had he? Looking back through the lens of this horrifying revelation, shadows began to emerge. Nathaniel had always insisted on handling the clinic paperwork. He was the one who hand-delivered the final samples to the lab on the morning of the fertilization. He told me I needed to rest. Bile rose in my throat. I left Harper in the study and sprinted upstairs to the attic. It was a dusty, cavernous space where we stored decades of forgotten memories. I tore through boxes of Christmas ornaments, old tax returns, and college textbooks, coughing through the dust until I found a heavy, steel lockbox hidden beneath a pile of old winter coats. It was Nathaniel's private file box. He had always claimed it held old blueprints for his firm. I grabbed a heavy claw hammer from the toolkit in the hall closet and smashed the cheap padlock until it snapped. Inside were files dating back 25 years. I frantically flipped through the manila folders until I found one labeled Medical, 2004. My hands shook violently as I opened it. The first document was a comprehensive urology report from a specialist Nathaniel had seen privately 3 months before we started our IVF journey. The diagnosis was highlighted in stark yellow marker. Azoospermia. Irreversible. Patient is entirely sterile and incapable of biological reproduction. He knew. He knew he couldn't have children before we ever set foot in the fertility clinic. I dug deeper into the file, pulling out a second document. It was a heavily redacted contract from a private donor agency, signed by Nathaniel. He had secretly purchased donor sperm, forged my signature of consent, and bribed someone at St. Prame Jude's to swap the samples during our IVF procedure. He let me believe Harper was his biological child for 22 years. But why? Why orchestrate such an insane deception, only to blow it up 2 decades later by weaponizing the very secret he had buried? My answer lay at the bottom of the lockbox. It wasn't just medical paperwork. There was a faded photograph of a woman, stunningly beautiful with dark hair and piercing eyes. Clipped to the back of the photo was a birth certificate, issued in November 2004, the exact same month Harper was born. The mother listed was Vanessa Prescott. The father listed was Nathaniel Harrington. My breath caught in my throat. If Nathaniel was medically sterile, how did he father a child with Vanessa? Unless the medical report I was holding was the fake, and the truth of what happened in 2004 was infinitely darker than a simple sperm donor swap. The labyrinth of my husband's lies was just beginning to crack open, and the monster I married had no idea I held the key. Staring at the photograph of Vanessa Prescott, the edges curling against the cold metal of the lockbox, a sickening clarity washed over me. The 2 conflicting documents sitting in my lap painted a picture of a man who was not merely unfaithful, but clinically psychopathic. If the 2004 medical report was true, and Nathaniel was completely sterile, how did his name end up on the birth certificate of Vanessa's child? If the report was a forgery to cover up his fertility, why on earth did he secretly purchase donor sperm and force me through the agonizing, hormone-fueled nightmare of in vitro fertilization? The labyrinth of his deception was too complex to navigate alone. The following morning, while Harper was upstairs meeting virtually with her college counselors, I sat in the cramped, stale coffee-scented office of Donovan Hayes. Donovan was a former fraud investigator turned private detective whom my attorney had recommended for his absolute discretion and ruthless efficiency. I slid the birth certificate and the photograph across his scarred wooden desk. "I need to know everything about this woman," I instructed, my voice remarkably steady despite the chaotic hammering in my chest. "Vanessa Prescott. And I need to know about the child, born in November 2004. Nathaniel has been hiding them for 22 years. Donovan studied the documents, his expression unreadable behind thick-rimmed glasses. "Give me 48 hours, Mrs. Harrington. Men with this kind of money always leave a paper trail. They think their wealth makes them invisible, but it usually just makes them sloppy." He didn't need 48 hours. He called me in 36. "I found her," Donovan said, the static of a car speakerphone crackling in the background. "She's not hiding in some cheap apartment, Rebecca. She's living on a 50-acre equestrian estate in the Hudson Valley. The property is held in a blind trust, but the taxes are paid by a subsidiary shell company linked directly to your husband's architectural firm. And the boy, his name is Leo. I'm sending you a photograph right now. My phone buzzed against my ear. I pulled it away to open the encrypted message Donovan had just sent. The image was taken with a telephoto lens, showing a young man in riding gear walking alongside a chestnut horse. I stopped breathing. It was like looking at a ghost. The boy possessed the exact same sharp jawline, the identical slope of the nose, and the very same piercing, arrogant eyes that had captivated me at a cocktail party 25 years ago. Leo was a carbon copy of Nathaniel. The sterile diagnosis from 2004 had been a complete fabrication. Nathaniel had paid a corrupt doctor to print a fake medical history to convince me he was incapable of having children. "Are you still there, Rebecca?" Donovan asked. "Send me the address," I whispered, a cold, hardened resolve replacing every ounce of grief I had been carrying. "I am going to pay Miss Prescott a visit." The drive to the Hudson Valley was a blur of autumn foliage and winding country roads. I pulled my car up to the imposing iron gates of the estate, buzzing the intercom until a crackly voice answered. I didn't give my name. I simply said, "Tell Vanessa that Nathaniel's wife is here, and if she doesn't open this gate, I will call the local authorities and every tabloid in the tri-state area." The gate swung open heavily. Vanessa Prescott was waiting for me on the wraparound porch of the sprawling farmhouse. She was older than the photograph, of course, but still exuded an effortless, expensive elegance. She wore cashmere and riding boots, clutching a mug of tea with a white-knuckled grip that betrayed her panic. She knew exactly who I was. "You shouldn't be here," Vanessa said, her voice trembling slightly as I climbed the wooden steps. "Nathaniel said you were being dealt with." "Dealt with?" I echoed, letting out a harsh, bitter laugh. "Is that what he calls destroying his family to protect his dirty secret? You have 5 minutes to tell me the truth, Vanessa, before I burn this entire estate to the ground with litigation." She flinched, stepping back toward the heavy oak door. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. We were in love before he even met you, Rebecca. But his family, they threatened to cut him off if he married a woman without proper social standing. You were the safe choice, the wealthy, well-connected wife that would appease his father." "And the pregnancy?" I demanded, pointing a shaking finger at her. "He faked a sterility report to push me into IVF." "Why?" Vanessa looked down, a flash of genuine shame crossing her features. "Because I got pregnant with Leo. Nathaniel was terrified you would stop using birth control and get pregnant too. He couldn't stomach the idea of having a legitimate child with you, while his true son was hidden away as a bastard. He wanted Leo to be his only biological heir. So, he faked the urology report. He told you his sperm count was 0, so you wouldn't question the need for a donor. He arranged the sperm swap at the clinic to guarantee that whatever child you carried would have 0 genetic tie to him." The sheer, staggering malice of his plan hit me with the force of a freight train. Nathaniel hadn't just cheated. He had engineered a 22-year psychological torture chamber. He watched me inject my stomach with hormones, held my hand through the tears of failed implantation cycles, and celebrated the birth of our daughter, all while knowing she was genetically engineered to be disposable. "He built a kill switch into your marriage," Vanessa whispered, looking up at me with tears pooling in her eyes. "He always planned to use the DNA test against you. He knew if he ever wanted to leave and take all his corporate wealth with him, he just had to discover that Harper wasn't his. Under your prenuptial agreement, it would look like you committed paternity fraud. He walks away with the IPO money, bringing it all here to Leo, and you walk away with nothing." Armed with a hidden audio recording of Vanessa's entire confession, captured flawlessly by a device Donovan had slipped into my coat pocket, my next destination was the mahogany-lined office of my attorney, Benjamin Gallagher. Benjamin was a veteran of high-stakes corporate divorces, a man who rarely showed emotion, but as he listened to the audio playback in his soundproof conference room, his jaw tightened until a muscle ticked visibly in his cheek. He paused the recording and looked across the polished table at me, his eyes gleaming with a predatory intensity. "Rebecca," Benjamin said softly, tapping a gold pen against his legal pad, "your husband thinks he is playing a game of chess against a blind opponent. He is relying on the infidelity clause in the prenuptial agreement to execute a hostile takeover of your shared assets. But by forging your signature on the donor agency contract in 2004 and falsifying medical records to manipulate a medical procedure, He hasn't just breached a civil contract, he's committed a crime, I finished for him, the realization settling like heavy iron in my stomach. Multiple crimes, Benjamin corrected, his voice dropping an octave. Medical fraud, identity theft, forgery, and attempted extortion. If we play this right, we aren't just going to invalidate the prenuptial agreement. We are going to take the entirety of his shares in the firm, and we are going to put him in a federal penitentiary. The plan we formulated over the next 72 hours was a masterpiece of legal warfare. We needed the original, physical documents from St. Rita, Jude's Memorial Hospital, to prove that Nathaniel was the sole orchestrator of the donor swap. Benjamin filed an emergency, sealed subpoena targeting the archived records of Dr. Eris Mercer, the former clinic director who had facilitated the procedure. While Benjamin worked the legal angles, I had the agonizing task of returning home to Harper. The house still felt hollowed out, but the air was less suffocating now that I carried the truth. I found my daughter curled up in the library, staring blankly at a textbook. Sitting beside her, I gently took her hands in mine. I didn't burden her with the sordid details of Vanessa and Leo. That was a poison she didn't need to swallow yet. But I told her the truth about her conception. "Your father isn't who we thought he was, Harper," I said gently, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "But you need to know this. You were not a mistake. You were not the product of betrayal. You were desperately wanted. He manipulated the clinical process, but I carried you. You are my flesh and blood, and nothing he engineered can ever change the fact that you are the best thing that ever happened to me." Harper leaned into my shoulder, a fragile sob shaking her frame. "Why would he do this to us, Mom?" "Because he is a hollow, broken man obsessed with money," I replied, my voice hardening. "And we are going to make sure he loses every single cent of it." The trap was set for the following Tuesday. Nathaniel's legal team had aggressively scheduled an emergency mediation session at the towering glass offices of his corporate firm. They intended to strong-arm me into signing a rapid settlement, terrified that the impending public offering of his architectural company would be derailed by a messy public divorce. I arrived at the boardroom, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, and a serene smile that I knew would infuriate my soon-to-be ex-husband. Benjamin walked beside me, carrying a single, unmarked leather briefcase. Nathaniel was already seated at the head of the long oak table, flanked by 3 high-priced litigation sharks. He looked smug, sipping sparkling water, exuding the confidence of a man who believed he held all the winning cards. He barely glanced at me as I took my seat. "Let's make this brief," Nathaniel's lead counsel, a sharp-faced woman in a navy blazer, began. "Given the undeniable DNA evidence of Mrs. Harrington's infidelity, which constitutes a material breach of the prenuptial agreement, my client is prepared to offer a one-time severance payment of $200,000. In exchange, Mrs. Harrington agrees to immediately vacate the marital estate and sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement." Benjamin didn't even open his briefcase. He simply leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. 200,000, Benjamin repeated, letting the number hang in the air. "For a woman whose husband is about to cash out $80 million in an IPO, that is quite the penalty for infidelity. The contract is ironclad, Mr. Gallagher," Nathaniel sneered, finally meeting my eyes with a look of pure contempt. "She broke the vows. She pays the price. She's lucky I'm offering her anything at all after passing off another man's bastard as my daughter for 2 decades. "Interesting choice of words, Nathaniel," I said, my voice eerily calm, echoing in the vast, silent boardroom. "Considering you already had a bastard son of your own living in the Hudson Valley while I was injecting myself with fertility drugs." The color drained from Nathaniel's face so fast he looked as though he might pass out. His smug posture vanished, replaced by a rigid, terrified stiffness. His lawyers exchanged confused, frantic glances. "I have absolutely no idea what she's talking about," Nathaniel stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "She's hysterical." "Is she?" Benjamin asked, finally unlatching his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of certified documents and slid them precisely down the center of the polished table. "Exhibit A," Benjamin announced, his voice booming with authority. "A birth certificate for one Leo Prescott, born November 2004. Father listed, Nathaniel Harrington. Exhibit B, bank transfers from a shell corporation tied to this very firm, paying the property taxes on an estate occupied by Vanessa Prescott. And finally, Exhibit C." Benjamin slid a single, yellowed piece of paper directly in front of Nathaniel's lead counsel. A certified copy of the donor sperm requisition form from St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, dated February 2003. You will notice the signature of consent at the bottom, supposedly belonging to my client, Rebecca Harrington. We had an independent forensic handwriting expert analyze this document yesterday. The signature is a masterclass forgery, traced directly from a checkbook belonging to your client, Mr. Harrington. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. You didn't uncover my client's infidelity, Nathaniel. Benjamin continued ruthlessly, twisting the knife. You fabricated it. You orchestrated a fraudulent medical procedure, forged legal medical consent forms, and deliberately manipulated a child's paternity to trigger a financial loophole in your prenuptial agreement. That isn't just grounds for invalidating the prenup, that is felony fraud. Nathaniel was shaking. The man who had terrorized me, who had thrown a forged DNA test on my kitchen counter just days prior, was completely unraveling before my eyes. You have no proof, he whispered. A desperate, hollow sound. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone, and tapped the screen. Vanessa's tearful voice filled the boardroom, echoing off the glass walls. He built a kill switch into your marriage. He always planned to use the DNA test against you. I stopped the recording and looked dead into the eyes of the monster I had married. I don't just want half, Nathaniel, I said, my voice cold as ice. I want it all. The silence that followed the abrupt click of my phone was absolute, suffocating, and magnificent. Chaos erupted a fraction of a second later. Nathaniel's lead counsel, the sharp-faced woman in the navy blazer who had been practically sneering at me mere minutes before, shot up from her ergonomic leather chair as if the seat cushion had spontaneously caught fire. In the ruthless, high-stakes realm of corporate divorce, representing a cheating spouse trying to hoard his wealth was just another Tuesday. However, representing a client actively engaging in felony fraud, criminal extortion, and the blatant forgery of medical documents to trigger a punitive contractual clause was a one-way, express ticket to disbarment and federal indictments. She didn't even bother to close her perfectly organized manila folders. She simply began frantically shoving her legal briefs into her designer litigation bag, her hands visibly trembling. She refused to look at Nathaniel, her eyes fixed firmly on the mahogany table. "We are taking an immediate recess," she announced, her voice clipped, high-pitched, and laced with absolute panic. "Mr. Harrington, as of this exact moment, our firm is formally withdrawing as your legal counsel. I strongly, unequivocally suggest you retain a criminal defense attorney before the sun sets." Watching his impenetrable, million-dollar legal shield evaporate into thin air was the most profoundly exhilarating moment of my entire life. Without another word, his 3 lawyers practically sprinted out of the glass-walled boardroom, abandoning him. The arrogant, untouchable architect had instantly been reduced to a pale, hyperventilating shell of a man. His chest heaved erratically, and sweat beaded along his forehead as he stared at the door they had just fled through. Benjamin leaned forward slowly, resting his elbows on the polished wood. His voice dropped into a low, lethal murmur that commanded the empty room. "Here is exactly what happens now, Nathaniel," Benjamin stated, his tone devoid of any mercy. "We are skipping mediation entirely. The settlement offer you brought today is dead. By the end of business hours today, you will sign over your complete ownership stake in the architectural firm to Rebecca. You will irrevocably forfeit the Connecticut estate, the liquid investment portfolios, and the corporate pension funds. You walk away from this marriage with exactly what you maliciously tried to leave her with: absolute nothingness. If you hesitate for a fraction of a second, if you attempt to negotiate, I will personally hand this entire briefcase of evidence to the district attorney, the state medical board, and the Securities and Exchange Commission." Desperation wildly clawed at Nathaniel's throat, breaking his stunned paralysis. "You can't take the firm. You're out of your mind. The IPO launches in 3 weeks. The underwriters will completely pull out if the founder is forcibly removed. The entire valuation will collapse overnight. I built that company. Then it collapses into dust," Benjamin replied coldly, smoothly sliding a sleek gold pen across the massive table. "Sign the papers, or wear a federal jumpsuit for the next 15 years. The choice is entirely yours." Defeated, utterly broken, and paralyzed by the sheer, suffocating terror of a prison cell, the monster who had meticulously tormented my mind for weeks reached for the pen. With a violently shaking, sweaty hand, he signed away his entire empire. His signature was a jagged, pathetic scrawl that officially sealed his absolute ruin. The ensuing months played out like a grand, devastating Greek tragedy, authored entirely by his own colossal hubris. Despite his frantic, pathetic attempts to quiet the storm, the toxic truth of his extortion plot rapidly bled into the corporate world. When the prominent underwriting banks discovered that the founder's shares had been forcibly transferred to his estranged wife under the dark shadow of criminal fraud, they panicked. The highly anticipated IPO was permanently canceled within 48 hours. This financial panic triggered a ruthless, sweeping internal audit by his furious partners. The auditors quickly unearthed the illegal web of offshore shell companies Nathaniel had utilized to secretly fund Vanessa Prescott's lavish Hudson Valley lifestyle. Tax evasion charges followed swiftly. The SEC froze his remaining personal accounts, and the architectural partners he had worked alongside for a decade forcibly ousted him from the board to save whatever meager scraps of reputation the company still held. As for Vanessa and Leo, their stolen, gilded cage shattered in the blink of an eye. With the fraudulent shell company funds completely dried up, the astronomical property taxes on the 50-acre equestrian estate went unpaid. The prized chestnut horses were loaded into trailers and repossessed. Within 6 brutal months, the property fell into foreclosure, forcing the mother and son into a cramped, dingy rental apartment in Albany. The secret family Nathaniel had destroyed his marriage to protect ended up vehemently despising him, completely cut off from the tens of millions they had been promised. Amidst the smoking wreckage of Nathaniel's life, Harper and I miraculously found a beautiful, unexpected peace. Using the legally unsealed medical records from St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, we quietly tracked down the biological identity of the sperm donor. We didn't want a dime from him. We simply needed the closure of knowing where half of Harper's incredible, resilient spirit came from. The clinic file revealed that in 2003, the anonymous donor had been a brilliant, compassionate medical student working through a grueling pediatric residency to pay off his loans. Today, he was the esteemed chief of pediatric oncology at a world-renowned hospital in Boston, a man who dedicated his entire existence to saving sick children. When I handed Harper his printed biography, she wept tears of profound, overwhelming relief. Her biological father was a literal hero who healed people, a poetic, staggering contrast to the narcissistic parasite who had raised her. Autumn eventually gave way to a bright, crisp spring. The sprawling Connecticut estate felt far too tainted by the ghosts of Nathaniel's lies, so I sold it to an overseas investor for a massive, life-changing sum. Harper and I stood in the empty grand foyer one last time, our voices echoing off the cold marble floors that had witnessed the dramatic end of a 2-decade deception. She linked her arm firmly through mine, her smile radiant and completely free from the heavy, suffocating shadow of the man who had maliciously tried to erase her. "Ready to go, Mom?" she asked, gently pulling me toward the open front door, where the idling moving truck and our brand-new lives awaited. Looking back at the empty, silent house, an overwhelming, fiery sense of triumph washed over me. Nathaniel Harrington had callously tried to dig a grave for me, plotting my total ruin to protect his sickening secrets. Instead, he blindly fell into the very pit he had dug, permanently burying his career, his wealth, and his freedom under the crushing weight of his own monstrous deception. "I've never been more ready," I replied, stepping out into the blinding, warm sunlight, leaving the darkness behind us forever. Betrayal thrives in the shadows, but the truth always demands the light. If this story of surviving a narcissist's ultimate trap and flipping his own sinister game against him resonated with you, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below on what you would have done in Rebecca's shoes, and stay tuned for more incredible true stories of survival and justice.